Right on, right on, right on.
Can science be trusted? I've been listening to this creator for a while now, and I find him like a big fluffy golden lab on his back for a belly rub from science. He's rarely critical of science. He is critical of claims made that don't provide the official backing for those claims. He's also about the science and demands all claims prove it. This is his list of proofs he supplies on his description page to prove he's right. Overwhelmed much? 89 items. Who's he talking to? Not me. None of those 89 give adequate information so I can find what I'm looking for easily. And he doesn't reference any specific in his presentations. But evidently he has covered his backside, throwing those on his description page. Whatever. So he recently critiqued Stan Ekberg's video from a year ago. I'm old. I know that we aren't in the same place today that we were in a year ago. And he said some things that triggered me. He said,
Justice for friends and family.
now, science is conducted by humans. Science is paid for by humans. Science has political consequences. Science has economical consequences. Science has religious consequences. Science has life consequences. If you don't understand the assumptions, money, politics, outcomes desired of any study, the outcomes can easily be misunderstood, fudged, redirected, falsified, ignored. For example, the standard American diet is based on non-science, observational evidence, and the political social success of the creator. I expect that the expert MD, PhD Gill is more than familiar with this claim, so do not feel the need to supply proof. If he's not aware, then he's been recalcitrant regarding his interest in helping us improve our health outcomes. They push carbohydrates as the top essential nutrient, like we must eat carbs to survive. But that is not the case. I made a video about the confusion. Ekberg's video is about the erroneous situation around cholesterol, where cholesterol has been blamed as the cause of heart disease. While cholesterol is involved in heart disease, it is not the cause, any more than the preferred source of energy of the brain is glucose. The brain uses glucose, but if ketones are present, it uses them first.
Cholesterol, because the way we have been understanding and dealing with cholesterol in the last 50 years is one of the greatest health disasters of all time. And there's this huge fear factor about cholesterol. When people are changing their lifestyle and they're getting healthier, they're losing weight, they're feeling better, all their health markers are improving except one. Their doctors still scare them into abandoning their healthy lifestyle and reverting to a low-fat diet because one marker, LDL cholesterol, is too high in their opinion. And this is all because we have bought into the idea without any good evidence that LDL cholesterol is bad cholesterol.
And I felt that MD PhD Gill was just a tad flippant throughout his critique.
So yeah, if a clinician is giving out statins automatically for everyone whose LDL cholesterol happens to be over 100 milligrams per deciliter, without looking at anything else, yeah, that's not what medical organizations recommend. I don't know anybody who does that, but so let's go over these one by one real quick. Muscle symptoms. Most people on a statin don't report muscle problems, but some definitely do. The exact number depends based on whether it's a randomized control trial or observational data, from 1% all the way up to 20-something% of people prescribed a statin. Here's the fascinating part about this. If you take people who report symptoms of statin intolerance, like muscle pain or weakness, and you split them randomly, and half gets a statin and the other half gets a placebo pill with no statin in it, but they don't know which is which, in both cases they report symptoms. Same intensity, no significant difference. So there's a huge component of expecting a statin to cause muscle pains and, sure enough, feeling more pain or noticing more pain and attributing to statins, even though the pill we're taking contains no statin. This is called the nocebo effect. Placebo is when I think I'm on a drug and I feel better even though I'm not taking the drug. Nocebo is when I think I'm on a drug and I feel worse even though I'm not taking that drug. And large analyses indicate that over 90% of reports of muscle symptoms on a statin are not actually due to the statin itself.
An essential nutrient.
Cholesterol is a non-essential nutrient. Right? The definition of an essential nutrient is something your body does not produce and needs to get from the outside. Cholesterol is produced all over the body. All tissues produce cholesterol. So it's a stereotypical example of a non-essential nutrient.
First, gaslighting is not a good look. Perhaps MD PhD Gill feels superior due to his credentials? I want a doctor who cares. I don't want a doctor who is so science-based that my pain and suffering is acceptable. Dr. Egberg serves the community and has experience of which he speaks. To ignore that is uncalled for. Second, there is a loud complaint as to the side effects from statins.
Back now with news about the blockbuster cholesterol drugs called statins. Doctors say they work wonders to prevent heart disease, but many patients say the side effects are just too painful. Now, for the first time, doctors say there's proof that those patients are right. And as NBC's Rahema Ellis reports, they're pointing to new alternatives.
Some of the most popular drugs in the country are statins, taken by about 25 million Americans to lower cholesterol and reduce heart disease. But they can also cause debilitating side effects, muscle pain, weakness, and cramping, reported by 5 to 20% of patients. Diane Sohan was one of them.
Everything was sore, and every time I moved, I get this more of a bad achy feeling.
For years, some doctors thought these complaints might be psychosomatic, all in their heads. But a new study concludes that the pain is real.
This now confirms for the first time that muscle intolerance to statins is a real problem affecting a significant portion of patients, and that those patients now, we need to be able to develop alternatives to treat them.
A number of you and the vast majority of doctors believe that statins are going to prevent heart attacks and save your life. So there are two diametrically opposed camps on statins. It's a $1 trillion industry. They're the most successful marketed drug in the history of medicine. So let's look at the data and whether or not you've had this conversation with your doctor before you start taking a statin, because it's a lifetime commitment. Once you start, you're supposed to continue. And about 58% of you all stop your statin. You don't tell your doctor that you did, and you stop them because of side effects, which is about 10% of people that take them. The most common being muscle aches or myopathy, myalgia. So the conversation you should have and the questions you should have before starting a statin is the difference between relative risk and absolute risk. And we're going to look at that more in depth on in this little video. So here's where I find this information. This is a meta-analysis from JAMA Network. You can see the link in the search bar up there. From March of 2022, evaluating low-density lipoprotein reduction, and remember, it's not a cholesterol, it carries cholesterol, with relative and absolute effects of statin treatment. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis of 21 studies. It comes out of Dublin, Ireland, Denmark, Australia, and a cardiologist in the Department of Medicine at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. This is from the abstract conclusions after all the findings, and suggesting in this study that absolute risk reductions of treatment with statins in terms of all-cause mortality, heart attack, and stroke are modest compared with the relative risk reductions. They discussed the limitations of the study by restricting the analysis to only hard endpoints, including total mortality, spontaneous heart attack, and strokes. And they say while it's an advantage to patients that clinicians report the benefits of intervention in terms of absolute risk reduction, this practice may not be as widespread as it should. They believe that absolute risk reduction discussion is essential for clinical decision making and provides a clinician with a more accurate means for discussing the true benefits and harms of a specific therapy. So my question is, of those of you who went ahead and took statins, did you have that discussion with your physician, nurse practitioner, physician's assistant? And were you afforded the opportunity to ask questions? Most of the time, the benefits of treatment with statins are reported as relative risk reductions. However, reporting that without the corresponding absolute risk reduction could be misleading. So in their analysis, the relative risk reduction for myocardial infarction was 29%, whereas the absolute risk reduction was 1.3%. So in their words, 77 participants would need to be treated with a statin for roughly 4.4 years on average to prevent one heart attack. So in their summary table, those numbers are there. So you've got relative risk reduction, absolute risk reduction. Hopefully I'm holding the phone steady enough for you. So relative risk reduction of all death was 9. And absolute risk reduction of all death was 0.8. And if you go down this table, you can make this larger and enlarge it. It's around 1%. Everything's around 1%. So secondary prevention, all death 0.9, myocardial infarction 2.2, so that's a little better. But primary prevention of heart attack 0.7, right around 1% absolute risk reduction. To put that in another context or a different way of looking at it, I heard a doctor on Twitter talk about the fact that you would need to treat 100 patients for 5 years to avoid one heart attack, and this is a cardiologist in the United Kingdom. And if you buy into the fact that there is a risk reduction based on the research that usually gets quoted and thrown at you if you have this discussion, if you believe that's true and you're at higher risk, so the risk reduction of 1% are for people that are low risk. If you're high risk, depending on how your doctor determines that, or I think the recommendation is a 7.5% risk of a heart attack in the next 10 years based on the clinical parameters. So if you buy into that, your absolute risk reduction would be 1 in 39, and that would be for heart attack or stroke. And your total risk, your absolute risk of death reduction would be 1 in 83. So the cardiologist from the University of New Mexico also did a paper with the British cardiologist from the United Kingdom in 2020, published in the British Medical Journal. I tried to pull it up so I could show you, but there's a paywall even for showing you the abstract, and it's not cheap. So this is the headline from the Daily Mail after that study was published. Statins may not slash the risk of dying from heart disease. Controversial study, there you go, claims the cheap cholesterol-busting pills offer no consistent benefit. And remember, this is from a cardiologist in the United Kingdom and here in the United States. And this quote in this article from the cardiologist in New Mexico, I found interesting. So, quote, in most fields of science, the existence of contradictory evidence usually leads to a paradigm shift or modification of the theory in question. But in this case, the contradictory evidence has been largely ignored simply because it doesn't fit the prevailing paradigm. So once again, my point of doing these little videos is to arm you with information so you can have a discussion with your physician who is maybe knee-jerking to put you on a statin. I heard from a family member and a bunch of the rest of you sending me your lipid panels and asking what I thought. Well, I don't practice, I don't make recommendations, but I can tell you the questions that you should ask of your prescribing healthcare provider before you go down that path of taking a statin for the rest of your life. Perhaps you will reduce your risk of death by 1-ish%, and you have a 10% chance of side effects, and 58% of you stop them, and you're so afraid that your doctor will get mad, which many of them do, that you don't tell them. So you just don't take your statin because you don't like the side effects.
Finally, someone is listening. Seems MD PhD Gill is one of those all in your head kind of guys. And lastly, just how essential is cholesterol?
Cholesterol is an organic molecule that resides in the lipid family. So we typically characterize these molecules by their solubility in water, and this is a not soluble in water molecule. So it is a hydrophobic molecule. Now, of course, cholesterol is about one of the most important molecules in the body. To be clear, if we didn't have the ability to make cholesterol, we would cease to exist. We wouldn't, in fact, you couldn't be born without the ability to do this. There are rare genetic conditions that impair the ability to make cholesterol, and these are uniformly fatal. So why do we need cholesterol? There are broadly two things that cholesterol is essential for. The first is that they contribute heavily to the cell membrane of virtually every cell in the body. So cells are actually kind of fluid things, spherical things, and what allows them to have that fluidity and what allows them to have membrane channels that allow things in and out of them is the cholesterol layer that forms the membrane. And secondly, cholesterol is an essential substrate for the production of some of the most important hormones in the body: cortisol, estrogen, testosterone. It's also essential for the creation of bile acids, which are necessary to be able to digest food. So, the mantra that I like to say is no cholesterol, no life.
Essential means if we don't eat it, we will die. Exogenous feeds endogenous. And if you want optimal nutrition, thus health, eat what your body can use to achieve that. Turns out the glucose mechanism makes sufficient glucose for the functioning of the brain, etc., without consuming exogenous glucose, namely carbohydrates. But in order for that to occur, we need to consume exogenous proteins and fats to provide the nutrients required for that process to work. Likewise, cholesterol requires the consumption of proteins and fats so that the nutrients necessary to make cholesterol are available. Is cholesterol the culprit? We've been told it is, that we need to reduce cholesterol and avoid foods that provide it, eggs and red meat. While some of the recommendations make sense, others are glaringly laughable. What they suggest you eat are carbs that raise glycemic load and trigger insulin. It's not a healthy solution. Soluble fiber. While the body can dispose of it efficiently, it is of no real use. Whey protein is a highly processed byproduct of cheese, to avoid, in my opinion. And saturated fats. Here's a couple clips, one on carbohydrates and one on saturated fats. Enjoy.
I think there's a general idea out there that carbs are essential to humans. And in fact, I've even run up against some nutritionists here in the United States that have even angrily pointed out to me that we can't exist on the planet without them.
Are carbohydrates essential? No. They are the only of the three macronutrients, if we're not counting alcohol, because that's not essential either. But of carbohydrates, fat, and protein, carbohydrates is the only one that is not essential. Our bodies can make it. We know that that we need to get fat and protein from the diet, especially the 9 essential amino acids, especially the essential fatty acids. We need to be getting that from the diet. Other fats are also necessary from the diet in order to fulfill our energy requirements, our energy needs. But carbohydrates are not. We can make them and we can be perfectly healthy. And that is very, very evident if we look back to traditional societies.
The fear of saturated fats. Now, I know for the last 50 or 60 or 70 years, we've been told that saturated fat is bad for us. First of all, we were told you shouldn't eat any saturated fat. Any saturated fat's bad for you, right? And then we were told, well, you just need to limit saturated fat because too much of it is bad for you. And then the American College of Cardiology stopped recommending a minimum intake of cholesterol because they well knew that eating cholesterol does not raise your cholesterol. And now they have an article that has been accepted by the Journal of the American College of Cardiology that's in the pre-proof stage. It just has to be gone over again for typos, and it will be published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. And it is a state-of-the-art review about saturated fat intake and the dangers or the lack of danger in eating any amount of saturated fat. And then I want to tell you about some other studies that have been around for decades that were basically ignored that showed that replacing animal fats with plant vegetable oil fats is bad for you and causes more heart attacks and more cancer and earlier death, that they ignored for what's 120 minus 65. That's how many years they've been ignoring this research. But this group of authors did this state-of-the-art review, and this is going to be published in the ACC Journal coming up, and this is a huge breakthrough for anyone who is either eating a low-carb diet, a keto diet, or a carnivore diet, or is contemplating eating low-carb, keto, or carnivore, and you were worried that it might increase your risk of heart attack or stroke, or that it might raise your cholesterol, or make you have a higher risk of having heart disease. If that's the reason that you weren't doing keto, then you need to listen to this live. This is gonna break the chains of cholesterol, of saturated fat, of the fear that if you eat what I call the proper human diet, you might be healthier, look healthier, but you're gonna have a heart attack, right? So there's all this research that's been out there that's either been just not published or has been actively suppressed for decades, showing that when you replace the saturated fat from animal fats with the polyunsaturated fats from vegetable oils, people uniformly do worse. They have more heart attacks, they have more cancer, they get sicker quicker, and they die quicker. Yeah, there's actual, and now I'm going to tell you about those studies in a minute. You're going to be blown away because you've heard so many people say, well, there's just no research to back up keto or carnivore or low carb, that it's safe. If you, I mean, yeah, you might lose weight and reverse your diabetes and reverse your fatty liver, but you're going to die of a heart attack. That this is the first major domino to fall, which is going to lead to all the other dominoes falling from saying that animal meat is bad for you, animal fats are bad for you, that high cholesterol is bad for you, that even high LDL is bad for you, that you should take a statin or other cholesterol lowering drug. All of those dominoes are about to fall. And I can predict that because the ACC allowed this paper to be published in their prestigious heart journal.
The focus needs to be on understanding how our bodies function, disconnected to potential financial gain from drug development and profit. How does a heart attack develop, and what can, if anything, we do to avoid such an outcome? Heart disease develops over decades. The better part of 50% of heart disease victims get their first warning when they die. I've been searching for the process of plaque development since plaques are a culprit in heart disease and stroke. I found this.
Muscle cells that are important in contraction of vessels. Surrounding the media, we have the adventitia, which is essentially connective tissue. There are a few theories of how atherosclerosis begins. One theory suggests that there is endothelial dysfunction, and when there is high amounts of circulating LDLs. Because there are high concentrations or high circulating low density lipoproteins, low LDLs, these LDLs can deposit in the tunica intima and then become oxidized. Oxidized LDL activates endothelial cells, causing the endothelial cells to express receptors for white blood cells on their surface. So to summarize here, I wrote, increase in LDLs deposits in tunica intima and becomes oxidized, which will activate endothelial cells. So here I'm drawing the same layers of the blood vessel, and we can see there is accumulation of oxidized LDLs, which will activate endothelial cells, which will begin expressing adhesion molecules for white blood cells. Adhesion of white blood cells, adhesion of blood leukocytes to activated endothelial cells will allow monocytes and T helper cells to move into the tunica intima layer of the blood vessel. When monocytes move into the tunica intima, they will become macrophages. And macrophages will then take up these oxidized LDLs and then become foam cells. The foam cells are key in atherosclerosis. Foam cells do many things, one of which is it promotes migration of smooth muscle cells, SMC, from the tunica media into the tunica intima, and also promotes smooth muscle cell proliferation. An increase in smooth muscle cell proliferation heightens or increases synthesis of collagen, which can lead to hardening of the atherosclerotic plaque. During this whole process, foam cells will also die, releasing its lipid content. This drives the growth of the plaque. As the plaque grows, it builds in pressure, which can cause rupturing of the plaque itself, which is where things can become serious. So here again, we have the tunica intima and tunica media of the blood vessel. Here are the smooth muscle cells which have accumulated in the tunica intima layer, as well as collagen. Foam cells here we have dead bone cells with lipid content spilt out. The growth of the plaque is this area here. Now, the plaque can then rupture, which can lead to thrombosis. Thrombosis is when the plaque ruptures and where coagulation happens to stop the plaque from spilling its content into the lumen. This forms a thrombus, a clot, which can impede blood flow and cause serious complications.
And I think that cholesterol has been accused of being the cause, but we don't have proof yet. We know it is present, but so are a bunch of other actions in cells. What changes the wall lining to let in the lipoproteins in the first place? Until we know why the endothelium becomes damaged, we don't have the cause. So we shouldn't blame LDL for causing the breakdown. But that is what has happened. I'll keep looking for the answers. When you jump the gun in a race, you have to start over. I think the cholesterol story should start over because they jumped the gun.
Basically, a fact gets repeated so many times and by reputable sources that it becomes unquestioned, even though it turns out it was never a fact to begin with.
So you can't trust science either. Knowledge is power. If you don't know, find out. Question everything. Understand why someone's in your face telling you whatever. And before you do it, double check it. Do what you decide is best for you. Because my health has suffered from eating the recommended way of eating, I'm trying to learn a better way. That's what I'm sharing on this channel.
Hey, thanks for watching.